Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Charlie Greene, who's the co-founder and CEO of Remento, and he's based in Los Angeles, California. Hi, Charlie. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great, Gary. Thank you so much for having me.
So Remento's been around for about 4 years, but first, who are you and how did you get involved in doing this startup?
I have always personally been deeply excited and passionate about storytelling, which in a large respect it stems from the fact that I grew up in a home with parents who were, I joke, like freakishly obsessed with the home video camcorder. And they inspired a deep appreciation for the value of documenting the moments that shape our lives.
Sure.
Which very much connects into what we're building with Remento, which
Sure.
is a product that is designed to make it as easy as possible to document the stories of an aging relative without them having to write a single word. For many years, if you wanted to have a memoir written, you would either have to write it yourself or hire someone to write it for you.
Sure.
And what we've built is a piece of technology that will guide either you or a loved one in documenting a life's worth of stories in a physical hardcover book, again, without having to write a single word.
So let's talk a little bit about how you decided that needed to become a product. Was there a personal story there where you realized X relative had a great life story? Maybe they were getting on in years and you needed to capture that. Or was there a personal story that triggered this?
Yeah, there was for me, and I would say there probably is. I know there is for many of the members of our team who are very connected to the mission of why this actually matters. In my case, I mentioned that in my family, there was always a video camcorder rolling.
Sure.
And all of the content from the first decade of my life took on a totally different meaning after my dad passed away just a couple days after my 10th birthday. And I grew up spending so much time wishing I could ask him questions about pieces of his life that I never had a chance to learn about, and would find myself drawn to the video from my childhood as a way to stay connected with him.
Sure.
So I grew up really cherishing all of that video. And then flash forward a little over 15 years later, my mom is diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. And it becomes really clear in that moment that it is very likely that my future kids will never have a chance to meet either of their grandparents.
Right.
And I was reflecting as my mom was getting ready for her chemotherapy treatment, what I had of her in terms of documentation. I had hundreds, maybe thousands of photos. Sure. And definitely hundreds of videos. But I didn't have anything that was longer than 8 seconds long in terms of video.
Right.
And I just remember thinking, my mom's lived through the digital age, and I actually have just as good of documentation of my parents from the 90s as I do from, the era in which I carried an iPhone around. So her and I sat down and we recorded what has historically and academically been called an oral history interview, which was effectively me just printing out a bunch of listicles about what to ask your parents before they die, questions that I have mine, and pulling out some scrapbooks. And we just sat down and we recorded her answers. And I figured I would hear the stories that, we as children, when we hear, roll our eyes because we've heard them so many times from our parents.
Sure.
But she spent that entire time telling me things about her life that I never knew.
And
it left me wondering, why was it that it took a cancer diagnosis for me to A, learn all of this from her, right, and then B, capture it in a capacity where it could be carried into the future.
Sure.
And so that's what we set out to do, was to find a way to take what is the great opportunity to get to know the people we love better and to document their stories for the future. And again, try to make that process as easy and simple and technology enabled as possible.
So roll that back a little bit to you and your background. Did you have a technology background getting into this? Well, I mean, where did you go to school? What did you do? Or is this something like, I see the need, I'm going to find the pieces, or did you have a technology background?
Well, I didn't have a technology background myself. I wasn't ever coding, but I had always been drawn to different ways of being able to create media. So sure. I spent a lot of time making documentary films. I started my career in journalism. Okay. Then I moved into speech writing. I was a speechwriter in the Obama administration for several years before moving into big media. 21st Century Fox, and then ultimately the Walt Disney Company.
Mhm.
And then I had an opportunity to go to business school, and I found myself contemplating either going to work in big media or trying to start something of my own.
Mhm.
And as I started contemplating that would look like, I couldn't help but think back to this experience that I had with my mom, and
Mhm.
just felt so excited about the idea of trying to bring an experience that brought so much value and joy into our family's
Sure.
experience, hopefully into others. And I'll say honestly, when we set out to build a company, we had no idea we were going to do that, but we knew that if we
Right.
could find a way to encourage people to document their stories before it was too late, it would be of incredible value.
And so how big is your team and who's involved?
So it's a product-led team. So the company is a product.
Mhm.
Uh, so we have engineers who work with us, we have product leaders who work with us, we have designers who work for us, and then we have people on the marketing side
Mhm.
as well. And then finally, people who support our customers. So there are about 10 of us in total. That number has ebbed and flowed over time,
Sure.
but it's people who are really committed to the mission and are always focused on building product that is able to, help people create these amazing stories.
So walk us through the process because you've mentioned, a printed book, which of course, as someone who is deeply involved in the output space, I'm very excited by that. But also, you've got all these other assets too, video clips and all that. So just walk through the process of, are those used as prompts or what's the process to get to the story? Because as I have found through my journey through the photo industry, most people don't know how to tell a story,
Yeah.
right? They don't understand the basics of, beginning, middle, and end, theme, or whatever. And they need some sort of guidance for that. So, what is the Remento process?
So what we tried to do basically was recreate what it would feel like if you or your family had hired a professional biographer to write your biography
Mhm.
for you. And if you hired a biographer, the first thing they would do is would sit down with you for many hours and interview you about your life.
Sure.
And many biographers that we spoke with when we were building this product shared that they would speak with members of your family to be able to understand the moments that your family feels like were relevant to your life as well.
Right.
So if you're buying a memento for, let's say, an aging parent, the first thing that you'll be prompted to do is add into memento the themes that you're interested in learning about.
Okay.
And we can do that for you if you want, but if you want to customize the experience, you can. So you say, I really want to learn about this person's childhood, and they had a specific,
Right.
very interesting experience, perhaps with the military, early in their career. I want to learn about
Sure.
that. And then what Remento will do is we'll send your loved one, the storyteller, a new storytelling prompt every week for a
Mhm.
year, or more frequently if you change the setting.
Mhm.
They receive an SMS text message and or an email prompting them to click a big green button that turns into a big red recording button that when they press invites them to start talking about that memory.
Mhm.
And what Remento will do is it will interview them
Mhm.
asynchronously about that experience,
Mhm.
hearing what is being said and asking follow-up questions in real time. Importantly, that person doesn't need to download any apps. There are no logins, there are no downloads. Many of our storytellers are over the age of 90 and have no problems using our technology because we explicitly built it for them.
Okay.
And then once they've recorded their story, we have built what we call speech to story technology, which
Mhm.
will take the recording, it'll turn it into a transcript, and then it will present that transcript in one of three formats, either a cleaned transcript, which is removing the ums, the ahs, and the extraneous language that's not relevant to the story. That's perfect for the family member that can speak in paragraphs. We
Right.
all know that person who you would actually want to read what they said.
Right.
Most don't speak that way. So what we'll do is offer you the ability to use the technology to turn it into a story that's written in either the first or the third person, which feels a lot more like you had hired that biographer to take
Sure.
the input and turn it into a polished final version. And then we'll take all of that content and then we'll print it into a hardcover,
Mhm.
beautifully color printed physical book that people can hold in their hands.
Mhm.
And our special touches that we add QR codes to the inside that when you scan, will link back to the recording that was used to write each story. So what we hear from our customers who are our storytellers is this is my memoir and it wrote itself.
Mhm.
Could not have been easier. I did it in a couple minutes each week. It was easier than having a FaceTime call.
Right.
And from their families, what they share is I love having this physical book in my hand of these stories, But what's just as important is knowing that I will always have my loved one's voice at my fingertips.
Mhm.
And that's something that for any of us who have lost someone in our lives is something that,
Sure.
we would give anything to have.
So when you're talking about like the content to get it started, let's say, for example, you were to gift the box, for example, for the holiday season for an aged parent, right? So does the person who's buying it or starting it or buying the service, do they have to preload it with prompts and things to kind of, is there a questionnaire they have to fill out? Because I know you can, like, they'll show on the website it says, they show you a picture and they say what's happening on this photo. So that has to
Mm.
come from somewhere.
So I remember when I did this with my mom myself, like the hack together version, I was
Yeah,
so overwhelmed with figuring out what to ask her. Like
exactly.
when do I ask her about her childhood?
Right.
Do I just bring this photo that I have of her that I'm
Right,
curious about
exactly.
into the conversation? Like, how do I do that? So we very early in our journey built a scientific advisory board.
Okay.
Part of these folks are people with deep expertise in memory and recall and reminiscing, including for people who have cognitive impairments. And the other group are people who have conducted tens of thousands of life story interviews. And together, these folks helped us develop a bank of questions, which
Okay.
are written in a way that is specifically designed to
Hmm.
inspire really interesting and compelling stories. So you use our Remento question bank to pick questions from. Again, you can pick them yourself, or we can just pick them for you.
Hmm.
And other people will actually upload photographs to be used as prompts, just as you
Okay.
mentioned, send their loved one a photo saying what was happening in this photo,
Yeah.
and then the story becomes about the photo.
I imagine that's quite an emotional experience. Like when you hear these audio clips of people talking about some of those photos. Like you said, if they're in their 80s or 90s and it was from their service in World War II or Korea or going to Woodstock or who knows what was going on. Imagine just having that audio available as part of the QR code is also just wonderful.
It works in both directions, right?
Right.
People who have a visual stimulus tell better stories.
Right.
Great story. You said people don't know how to tell great stories. Like the
Right.
best stories have specifics in them.
Right.
What did it feel like? Who was around? What happened before? What happened after?
Right.
Speaking in generalities is not the way to tell a great story, and photographs can help anchor people in the specifics. And then,
Hmm.
of course, being able to, as the person who's watching or listening to a story,
Hmm.
being able to see the photograph right there makes the storytelling all the more compelling.
And then the deliverable is kind of a hybrid product, right? Because you've got the printed book. And I mean, how many pages do they generally run, the hardbound printed book?
So they can be printed up to 380 pages right now.
Okay. And can
Yeah,
pictures be put in there, or is that
yeah. Pictures are
okay?
all
Yeah,
put in there, and they're color printed, really beautiful, high premium paper. It's designed to be a keepsake.
but you also have the hybrid component of, the digital assets they can pull down from wherever you're doing your storage, I imagine. And is there any kind of guarantee or something that those assets will always be there?
Well, it's a question that people ask us all the time. And I'm
Right.
not in the business of predicting the future, right? So for me to sit here and say, I will store your assets indefinitely forever,
Right.
unless we're operating on the blockchain, which even then opens questions as to the durability of that medium.
Right.
So what we do is we let our customers download any of the content that's recorded on
Right.
Remento at any
Interesting.
time for free. So we make a commitment that as long as we're able to host your content, we will, and we'll
Mhm.
make sure that the QR codes link to it because it's the most compelling way to engage with the
Sure.
content rather than being forgotten about in a Google Drive. That was one of the things I did with my mom. I edited all the content, I put it together, and then I got forgotten about because there wasn't a physical thing for us to hold and
Right.
have access to. With Remento, you have the physical product and the digital product, and we make it really easy to be able to back up everything either locally to your device or to a cloud account like a Google Drive or a Dropbox.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is how, you've got this AI powered questioning, storyboarding, life inquisition system that creates a physical printed product at the end. It almost goes counter to what people are doing with a lot of the AI stuff, right? It's got to stay in digital, it's got to be digital, it's got this all this wonderful stuff. Was that always the plan from the beginning when you were pitching this to supporters and investors and whatnot, that hey, we're going to be printing stuff?
I would say the thing that we were really focused on at the beginning
Hmm.
was getting people to record life stories.
Right. Okay.
And what we realized was there were two problems.
Right.
The first problem was that it takes a lot of work.
Right.
And the second thing is a lot of video content that doesn't actually manifest into anything is really hard to appreciate at any given moment.
Right.
So what we did was we came to the realization that if we can make the final product a physical product, it
Right.
creates a really clear destination for a family to work towards,
Right.
creating what we refer to in the product space as value legibility.
Mhm.
And if we can find a way to use any technology available to be able to make the process of getting there easy,
Right.
we could overcome the hurdle of people actually adopting. So there are so many exciting uses of AI right now.
Right.
And
Of course.
feels like a lot of them are solving problems that may or may not actually exist in the world.
Exactly. Kind of like NFTs, right? And that's kind of
Yeah, who needs an NFT? I mean, like they're great, right? But I don't think anyone woke up today and realized that an NFT was solving their problem. Perhaps
right.
some doing things that they'd rather not be regulated, which leads to a whole different set of
Yeah.
questions. Plus, the question was always, how do we find a way to make it easy to document life stories?
Right.
And rather than looking for AI, rather than looking for a problem for AI to solve, we've used AI to solve what has always been a very clear problem for us to
Right.
address.
Yeah, it's interesting you said because you and I met at the Visual First conference in October, and that was kind of the theme of the thing was AI is just a tool to aid in your business. It's not a thing in and of itself. So I think that's a pretty valuable way of looking at it. It's helping you get to where you want to go because honestly, you know, 10 years ago, the technology existed to do what you're doing now. It was just would have been far more labor intensive.
Yeah, it couldn't have been automated. You couldn't conduct an interview in real time without a human being
Right,
that was listening and asking contextually relevant follow-up questions
right,
and then processing a transcript into a story. Like
right.
these are large language models at work.
Hmm.
And for many of our customers, it's the first time they're actually seeing these things manifest in a
Sure.
way that feels valuable to them, separate from typing an interesting prompt into ChatGPT, like write a poem for my spouse.
Right.
Even 3 years ago, what we are doing now was not possible in the way that it is currently instrumented today.
Have you had any experience with customers who have struggled with difficult stories?
Mm.
Right? Because not everything's happy, right? Not everything is positive, and sometimes people aren't comfortable talking about that, but that still may be an important piece to their story. What has been your experience just in a broad spectrum with your customers who have had to deal with some serious issues with their stories?
Yeah, of course. I mean, not everyone's story is happy, right? A couple things I would share. There's been some really important academic research that has been created about the importance of sharing family stories with your family,
Hmm.
specifically children, with very clear documentation that telling stories of resilience, of
Hmm.
challenge, of hardship within a family can foster emotional resilience within children by hearing
Right.
those stories. So I think a lot of us think when we have kids, we want to shield them from the hardships that our family has.
That's exactly that's where I was going with that.
But actually, there's a lot of research that shows that sharing with your kids the kinds of things that your family has overcome actually primes them to be able to understand that they come from a lineage that can handle adversity, and the research is bulletproof on that front. When we started this, we went into it knowing that some people will have had experiences in their past they don't want to talk about. And from a product perspective, we have to make sure that if you're asked a question about a topic that you're not interested in talking about, you don't feel like you're being bullied into doing it.
Right. Tell us
But
about that time you were in jail.
yeah, exactly. But actually, the challenge that we have to solve, and we spend more time focused on solving, is actually the exact reverse of this problem,
Mhm.
which I'll explain through an anecdote. One of the first people who onboarded onto the Remento platform was my wife's grandmother, who had some experiences in her past that my wife's mother had said, "Don't ask Gammy about these experiences. She doesn't like
Right.
to talk about." And Lily knew full well not to ask these questions. This was a version of Remento that was actually a live conversation.
Right.
And I'll never forget, Lily was asking her grandmother about one of these experiences that had nothing to do with the areas to stay away from. And it very naturally segued into the area that Lily was not supposed to ask about.
Right.
And the grandma just started talking about this thing
Hmm.
that she had never talked about before.
Wow.
And at the end, I asked Gammy, like, Gammy, I didn't know that. Why was it that you were comfortable sharing this today? And she said, I've always been comfortable. No one in the family has ever asked about it.
Oh, interesting.
And that for us is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about.
Right.
Where are the areas within a family that feel like they're taboo,
Right.
that they feel like things that we don't talk about because we shouldn't, when in actuality, they are just things that we haven't asked questions about. That's something
Sure.
that we see very specifically with members of the military and
Hmm.
veterans who spend long portions of their life uncomfortable talking about their service,
Sure.
who, as they age, actually become comfortable talking about things that they haven't in the past. And if our company, Remento, can serve as a way of facilitating very meaningful and important connection around those topics within a family, like
Hmm.
we want to be able to be the excuse for that conversation to happen.
I'm just fascinated kind of with the parallels between your background as a documentary filmmaker, whatever, and this sort of thing. It must be very gratifying to see this not really being democratized, but productized, right? Where everyone can literally have a documentary or a biography made about them.
It's something I think about a lot. I remember watching a 60 Minutes episode years ago that highlighted what Steven Spielberg was doing with the Shoah Foundation,
Right.
which is an effort that has collected millions of dollars to document the stories
Hmm.
of living Holocaust survivors
Right.
and talk about a group of people whose stories deserve to be documented in high fidelity with big 4K cameras. Some people have even been filmed in three-dimensional cages so that we can create avatars and holograms of them today and in the future.
Right.
I just remember thinking to myself, as a society, of course we should document those stories.
Right.
In 40 years, for you personally, you will care so much more about the story of your mom or your dad than one of their
Right.
stories. And why is it the case that in my pocket, where I have on my camera currently 4 different cameras, I don't feel compelled to ask my mom a question about her childhood?
Right.
So the idea of democratizing the capture of family stories and memories has been something that we've been really inspired to try to do. And yeah, to your point, it's deeply humbling to be able to scale that.
Speaking of scaling it, just kind of round numbers, how well have you done in the 4 years? Are you reaching your targets or your goals?
Yeah, I mean, again, deeply humbling. Like what we hear from people when we talk about what we're building is almost always one of two things,
Hmm.
which is either there is someone in my life that this would be perfect for,
Right.
or I wish it wasn't too late to do this with someone I love.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about because both my parents have passed, right? So it's very much because going through their stuff is like, wow, didn't know this, didn't know that. This has been good to know. So I get what you're saying about the opportunity missed.
We hear about that exact moment from so many families, like the
Mm.
process of writing an obituary, sometimes in the hours after someone has passed away,
Right.
realize that you have gaps in
Right.
understanding that person's life
Yeah.
just hours after it's become too late to ask those questions. So, yeah,
Right.
the challenge for us, the thing that is most invigorating and also most frustrating is
Mhm.
how do I convince you or your son to make the time to do this with you?
Mhm.
Because at one point it will become too late, and we
Right.
want to make sure that we don't get to the point where we haven't done this at that
Well,
point.
here's a product suggestion. Don't have to take me up on it, but you could have just like obituary this as a summary, just and it creates a 3 paragraph summary for someone. Just throwing it out there. Just
It's
throwing
a
it
great
out.
idea. Look, what we're focused on doing right now is collecting life stories,
Right.
right? And for some of our customers, they have
Sure.
hours and hours of video.
Sure.
That becomes incredibly exciting when it comes to both creating this book, which
Right.
is the deliverable that people expect when they buy our product.
Hmm.
But our company over time looks to be much more than a book printing business.
Right.
Like we're looking to be the platform where all of those precious memories, not the ones that are posted to Facebook that we love,
Yeah.
but the ones that actually deserve to be memorialized in
Right.
a more meaningful and important way
Hmm.
exist. Once you have that content, whether it's cranking out an obituary or turning those recordings into a documentary or recreating your loved one as a hologram. Like those are all things that you only have the opportunity to do if you've actually collected the foundational data
Right.
through the process of creating your book. We're putting you on the journey of doing.
You kind of laid out sort of the future of sort of this thing, but we'll always have the printed book, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We'll never take that away. And we'll print out as many as you want, by the way. So you
There
get
you go.
one book when you purchase Remento included. And then our great partners at RPI, shout out to the team at RPI, will happily print as many copies as you'd like for your
So they're
family.
going to store a copy of it somewhere for you.
We store the
Or
copy
you
and
store it.
we send it to them as whenever you want to order additionals.
Have you had to deal much with unhappy people at some point? I'm just curious because you may get people who are dealing with, hey, you haven't got it right or told the story. I'm just curious how you would even cope with that or deal with that because I imagine you've gotten one at least, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building product and you don't have any unhappy customers, it's probably the case that you don't have any customers at all.
Right.
And we spend a lot of time listening to our customers.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
the only thing better than hearing customers share really powerful stories about how they've captured the stories of people they love is getting critical product feedback. And we get it all the time because we're
Right.
doing a lot of different things and we have
Right.
really bold ambitions about how to support our customers in the future. So yeah, we get tons of feedback. Some of it's incredibly frustrated customers who are saying, why on earth is Remento not available in German? My storyteller doesn't speak English.
Right.
We get people who are frustrated that they can't customize every single part of their book
Right.
and also love the simplicity of the process of building their book. And then we get all sorts of different feedback as questions and requests for the future. I think the biggest surprise for me in terms of feedback has been around what we call grandparent proofing our product.
Mm-hmm.
I always assumed that there would be a really strong correlation between age and tech savviness.
Mm-hmm.
As you age, you
Sure.
become tech savvy. And what's actually proven to be the case is that correlation is much less strong than I thought. We have people who are in their 80s and in their 90s who are logging into Remento, they're recording their stories, they're picking new questions for themselves to answer, they're gifting our product to their friends and family.
Right.
And then we also have people in their 60s who get a text message from us and say, I don't know how to open my texts. And for those people, there's only so much we can do other than
Right.
suggest that someone who support them through that exercise.
Awesome. So, Charlie, this has been great. So, where can people go for more information to learn about Remento or talk to you about partnerships or fun stuff like that? Where can people go for more information?
Well, the easiest thing to do is to Google us. The company's name is Remento. It's like the words remember or record or reflect and memento combined into one. It turns
Good
out it's a lot.
branding.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it turns out it's a lot easier to build a company around a word that doesn't exist if you want to show up when people Google it than if you try to find a word that does.
Exactly.
So yeah, you can Google our company, and if you have questions, you can reach out directly through our website. And yeah,
Mhm.
we'd love to be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlie. Great to meet you. Take care.
A pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.